Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
What's going on, James? There's not one person at MI6 who isn't talking about it.
What? The upcoming draft investigatory powers bill? Sadly, my invite to the premiere of the new film got lost in the post, so I'm at this display of Bond cars at the London Film Museum instead. Spoiler alert, in the new Bond film in which he drives this, one of the themes is surveillance in the internet age. And Westminster is revving up for a potential row about how much the police and the intelligence agencies can see what we've been up to. Because in the Goldfinger years of the 60s, it was easy to spy on the villains, tail their roles or tap their phone. Now, in the Daniel Craig era, the spooks need new weapons to track down baddies who communicate online. One source told me that the work at places like the Listening Post GCHQ has shifted from looking for a needle in a haystack to finding a piece of hay in a haystack. And so a big question will be, how does the government handle what's called bulk data? In other words, looking at everyone's web activity to isolate the dodgy stuff. Not something to worry about, say security types.
They're not interested in whether Lord West is having an affair with somebody. They don't care. They don't look at that. What they want to know is, am I talking to a bomb maker in the Yemen who's talking to someone who they know has actually carried out an attack in the Middle East before, who's talking to some American group that we know are terrorists, that's talking to some people in Forest Gate here? When they get all these linkages, they hone it down and hone it down. They use big data in the sense they use other techniques to refine it. Then they'll say, look, this is actually extremely worrying. There's something going on here. And then they'll say, we want to go and look at the detail of what's in these emails or in this social media.
But it scares the living daylights out of campaigners like Shami Chakrabarti. The big issue for her, whether judges get to be involved.
At the moment, if someone wants to tap your telephone, it's the Foreign Secretary or the Home Secretary who decides. Normally in democracies we think there's a role for the judiciary in protecting our rights and freedoms. This hasn't happened in the UK compared to the US or elsewhere in relation to telephone tapping. I think we also need to look to see the extent to which the security agencies seek more power. Do they want the power to hack our computers, our telephones and so on? Something that was considered outrageous when journalists did it, is it now going to be okay for the spooks?
And this is actually a sequel. When the last Bond film came out 3 years ago, Parliament was fighting over the so-called Snoopers Charter, which would have compelled internet companies to keep and hand over a lot of our data. It was thrown out when Nick Clegg played the role of Dr. No and blocked it. A security-minded Conservative told me this could be another car crash because there are enough Tory MPs worried about civil liberties that the government will need Labour's support in the Commons, although a vote is some way off. So, will your browsing history remain for your eyes only? Do you trust Her Majesty's Secret Services? Are the Warriors just a bunch of octopuses? Stay tuned for Theresa May's new legislation, coming soon. Hopefully they don't ban bad James Bond puns.
New surveillance laws will not allow security services and police access to people's web browsing history. The revival of the so-called Snoopers Charter will get its draft publication in Parliament on Wednesday. This morning, some of the country's senior police chiefs have warned that a failure to back new investigative powers would have significant implications for public safety. The Home Secretary has insisted this morning that the new powers will be properly overseen and will make sure that they are not abused.
If there are more intrusive requirements, then of course warrants are required for those, and part of the bill is about making sure that we've got oversight arrangements in place for all of these powers, strong oversight arrangements. It's about bringing the ability of our law enforcement and security services to deal with the issues they're dealing with the criminals and with the terrorists, bringing that forward into the digital age. As the criminals move into the digital age, so do those who are searching out those criminals and ensuring that we can stop them and disrupt them.
Let's kick off then with this whole issue, and Theresa May's just been talking about it. Shami, you've got it on the front of the Observer. Theresa May forced to backtrack over plan to snoop. What does it say?
And it goes on to say, climb down is just spin, Liberty Chief. I think that's me.
It might just be.
But there is a point here about the way that things are announced and pre-announced and fed to newspapers. We haven't seen this legislation yet. We're going to see it on Wednesday, but we have been, in my view, subject to a great big PR onslaught in recent days.
I hope the security services
well,
and the police.
some newspapers have been invited to have exclusive access to GCHQ, and they've been writing sort of big puff pieces about the difficult work that goes on there, granted. And now, in the face of growing concern about the blanket nature of surveillance powers, not just targeted at suspects, but affecting all of us, it seems that there has been some suggestion, I would say some spin, that there are going to be serious concessions.
But we have heard from the Home Secretary just now. What she is saying, does that address some of the concerns about getting judicial oversight in some areas?
Well, you see, that I've been listening to this language, this slightly woolly language of oversight, but what I haven't heard is that we're going to have what they have in America and they have all over the free world, which is before your communications are intercepted, a judge signs a warrant. That's what happens all over the world.
For every single person?
Yeah, but you know, if I want to search your office or your home, and I'm the police or the security services, I normally have to go to a magistrate for a warrant. But not if I want to listen to your communications. There, at the moment, it's just a politician who signs off. And it's even...
Andrew.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think the critical thing here is that, make the point about, the drip feed into the media. I would call it the drip feed. I think there's genuine concern here. There's the issue of safety and public interest, and there is a real concern amongst the general public that politicians do respond to the threat and the level of threat, but also there's protecting the privacy as well then. And so much of this work is clandestine and behind closed doors that actually the greater exposure that's been given by these interviews, by the press coverage, is helping the public inform the debate and inform the decision. And I do think that Theresa May, the Home Secretary on this one, is moving in the right direction and is responding to the calls for greater clarity on IT and using the new powers that we have, with obviously making sure that the security services have everything they need.
Now, Aisha, what's your take on it? I mean, this part of it that seems strange to me about the way the debate is framed is if nothing's going on at the moment, and we're just going to be, our security services are just going to begin to start to intervening in these kind of areas. Of course, it's been going on for a very long time, and this is in a way about clarifying what they should and shouldn't be doing.
I mean, I think the public absolutely will want to know that the security services have got the right tools to be able to do their jobs effectively. But I think there is a real growing concern about how information is harvested and stored from, in a digital age. I think there's a lot of confusion in the public about what corporations are, information's being used. There's all the worries that people have about hacking, about sort of cybercrime, and people want to know what is actually happening in a technology-driven world now, where there's a lot of misinformation and people don't know everything that's been
and it's how it expands out, isn't it? So local authorities could use some of the powers, and the police then to look at journalists' records and things like that.
And I mean, one of the things which, I think there's sort of some confusion about it. I mean, the two newspapers are reporting different things. The amount of time your mobile phone company or your internet provider, how long are they going to keep every single thing that you Google? Is that going to be stored and logged as an individual private citizen? How is that information going to be used? Is it going to be, will Theresa May sign something off? Well, people want to know, have clarity about what their personal information is being used here.
But that goes to the crux of it, isn't it? I mean, I think people are quite accepting that, for state security, if you like, and state safety, there is a need to get a certain amount of information. But when private companies and other bodies tend to use this as data collection on their employees and how that might be used, I think that is a genuine concern in many people's minds. minds. And so people want to be safe, they want to be secure, but you've got to strike the compromise in the middle.
I think having just seen what we saw last week with the House of Lords and the tax credits, the House of Lords will look at this, you know, with great scrutiny, and I think it may not be plain sailing for the government on this.
4 days before the actual draft legislation? Why the PR campaign before the actual legislation that we would be able to debate?
Home Secretary, who was, of course, a Labour leadership contender, Andy Burnham. He's in Lee, and a very good morning to you, Mr. Burnham. So have you talked to your leader about whether this is now something Labour can support?
Well, of course, we haven't yet seen the detail, Dermot. The government will only publish the bill on Wednesday, but there is a broad acceptance that a new law is now needed. The online world has created blind spots where the authorities can't see anymore. And this isn't just about counter-terrorism, it's about child sexual exploitation, fraud. There is a need for a new legal framework so that they can do their job, the police and the security services, and keep us safe. But of course, that has to be balanced by legitimate concerns about liberty and privacy. And my job is to make sure the government gets that balance right. And so what I can do at this stage is make sure the debate is calm and measured, and that is what I'm going to do. You know, I'm not going to play politics with this issue. We need to get a legal framework that is ready for the digital age, and I'll be working hard to hold the government to account, but crucially to get that balance right.
And fair enough, you want to see the bill itself. But, you know, I phrase that question by saying, if you talk to the leader about it, because of the fluid nature of policy making at the moment within the party, are you and Jeremy Corbyn, because it is so important, as you point out, are you going to be singing from the same hymn sheet on this?
Well, of course I've spoken to Jeremy about it, and the approach that I'm outlining to you today is the approach that I've outlined to him, which is that Labour should accept the need for a new law. We'll wait to see what that law is. We should approach this in a constructive way, because it's in the country's interest that we have a modern law to give the police and the security services the powers that they need. But Labour should insist on strong safeguards to protect people's privacy and their liberties. Now, you began by saying them that the government had agreed that judges would have oversight. That isn't what the Home Secretary is saying this morning. She is yet to make clear whether it will be a politician or a judge who signs off these requests. I am saying quite clearly we should accept the recommendations of the Anderson report, the government's independent reviewer of counter-terrorism legislation, and we should ensure that judges have the final say on the most intrusive warrants.
But on the Andrew Marr show this morning, the Home Secretary Theresa May did confirm that internet service providers would have to keep browsing history for 12 months, and she was asked about whether judges would need to approve requests for surveillance.
As I say, the three reviews came out with three different options on this. David Anderson was clear that he thought, partly in relation to future-proofing on future legislation, future legal challenges, perhaps judicial authorisation was the right way. The Parliamentary Committee, the Intelligence and Security Committee of Parliament, said that there should be executive authorisation, i.e. Secretary of State should still do it, because of the accountability argument.
I see.
We've looked at all of those arguments, we've listened to what people have said, and we'll be bringing forward the government's position on Wednesday. But as I say, I'm very clear that what we will bring forward has very strong oversight arrangements.
And we're joined now by the Shadow Home Office Minister, former Director of Public Prosecutions, Keir Starmer. Welcome to the Daily Politics. I think this is the first time that we've had you on.
It is.
So good to see you. As a general principle, do you support stronger powers for the security services in accessing digital communications data?
I think there is a strong case for a new law. We've been patching up for a very long time. The law is out of date, and it's very important we don't have no-go areas for those involved in serious offending. And here we're talking not just about terrorists, but child sexual abuse, etc. And when I was
organised crime.
On organised crime, and when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, we rarely prosecuted those cases without relying on communications data. So this is very important for protecting the public.
Is judicial, as opposed to ministerial approval of warrants, to be able to do this surveillance, is that a red line issue for you?
It is, because I think what we've got here is we've got the chance to have a modern, comprehensive law that sets out the powers for law enforcement and the security services. And at the same time, we've got the chance, a historic chance, to get the safeguards right. And one of the safeguards that's really important is judicial authorisation of intercept warrants. There's a big difference between data and contents. And by contents, we mean what are people actually saying to each other? That should be signed off by a judge. That's what happens in other countries. I think that's a real issue where, in fairness, I think Theresa May the Home Secretary has backed off from the original plans, faced up to some of the criticism that's been there. But it is really a chance now for all of us to agree a framework for the future that is on the one hand giving the authorities the powers they need, but on the other hand entrenching in law the right safeguards, and judicial oversight is really important in that.
Now, we don't know exactly what she's going to say. She has to tell Parliament before she can tell the BBC or another broadcaster. But briefed out today in the Sunday Times is this idea of a two-tier system that an initial warrant to get access, for example, to what's my browsing history, and an initial warrant to find out what websites I've been going to, that would be issued by the Home Secretary, by a minister. But if you then want to get into the content of what's in these websites, or what I've been sending, that needs to be a judge. That's one idea that's been mooted. What would your reaction be to that?
Well, it's slightly difficult because we don't know the details. I saw the story in the Times.
As a broad principle, a two-tier system.
I'm not in favour of a two-tier system. I think if you're going to go for contents, we should go to a judge straight off. There are, roughly speaking, about 2,500 warrants per year for interception. That's a very high number for a Home Secretary to deal with. And what that means in reality is that a lot of the preparation is done by her team for her to look at. Nothing wrong with that, and I'm not being critical of the team, but it would be far better if it was done by a judge independent of any of the operations, independent of all the parties. It's a classically judge test. Is it necessary? Is it proportionate? Is it focused on the right person? This is what's done in other countries, and this would really, I think, this would settle this dispute, and it would allow everybody to move on. And consensus here is really important. This could be a historic moment if the Home Secretary will allow it to be. And as I say, she's stepped in the right direction. If she completes on that by having the right safeguards, then that is a prize worth having.
However, who would be accountable if a judge refused a warrant? Not a politician, but a judge refused a warrant, and as a result, there was a terrorist attack. Who do we hold accountable?
Well, one idea would be to have a panel of judges, a commission of judges. There are many judges that are cleared to do this sort of work, and individual decisions have to be made. Now, in the main, we obviously hope that decisions are right, but some will be refused.
We couldn't hold a judge accountable, could we? Well, I mean, if the Home Secretary gets it wrong, she's accountable. She has to appear before Parliament, she has to come on television. It could actually be the end of her job, or whoever the Home Secretary is, if they got something that wrong. The judge wouldn't be accountable.
Well, the judges, I mean, we've always had a system of accountability that relies on the right person making the decision in the first place, and then after the event, investigation and looking at the warrants that have been issued. That system can perfectly well continue. It's slightly difficult. We're arguing in the dark, but I don't accept the proposition that if you put it to an independent judge, that is a lesser safeguard than if you put it to the Home Secretary, because these are decisions about our privacy is too precious to be left to the Home Secretary. It should be put with a judge.
I take it that within these constraints, you think that internet browsing histories of every computer device should be kept by the internet providers for 12 months?
Well, that's the position that David Anderson, the independent reviewer, proposed. We'll have to see what's in the bill, but whatever it is, it needs to be as clearly constrained as possible for as short a period as possible. We need law enforcement and the agencies to be able to carry out their functions. But this is the chance for the safeguards. How long, how much, who accesses it, and what conditions?
Your leader and your deputy leader in the Labour Party, they're really been opposed to this type of legislation. Mr Corbyn called a previous attempt to go down this road, quote, a massive intrusion into people's lives. What do you say to him?
Well, it is a massive intrusion into people's lives. Any interception of communication is a massive intrusion. The question is whether it's legitimate and justified.
He thought it wasn't.
I've worked with the police, with law enforcement and the security services for 5 years when I was Director of Public Prosecutions. And I know just how important it is that we get access to the material we need to get access to. As I say, not just in terrorist cases, in all sorts of cases.
Well, as you say, you've been DPP. So how much more difficult would it have been for you to get major convictions in very serious cases without both the 2000 and the 2006 terrorism acts, which Mr. Corbyn opposed?
Very difficult, very difficult. We used them on a regular basis. I said that when I was DPP. I made the case that we should not lose capability, and I'm not about to change my mind.
And it isn't just your leader or his deputy. I was looking, many of the 22 Labour MPs who voted against the previous piece of legislation on this subject area, they were the ones who later nominated Mr. Corbyn for leader. And they're now in positions of power and influence in your party. I mean, do you risk quite a serious split on this issue?
I don't think so. I mean, I think what Mr. Corbyn has shown is that he listens to colleagues as we come up with the policy response to the government. Our response will be put out on Wednesday in response to what the Home Secretary actually says. But the principles that I've set out this morning are principles upon which we're agreed. The right powers to the authorities, but seize the opportunity for proper safeguards. And Mr. Corbyn and others, in fairness, in the past were emphasising the case for safeguards, which they didn't think were strong enough.
So just to clarify, is it true, as I've been told, that you've squared Mr. Corbyn, you and others, including Mr. Burnham, have squared him on this, that if there is, in your view, proper judicial oversight, then Mr. Corbyn will go along with these changes now?
Well, I wouldn't use the expression squared him myself. We've obviously had a discussion, and there's complete clarity and agreement that proper powers where they're needed, absolutely right to have proper safeguards. And if we can get that balance right, and we'll be pushing the government...
You'll be with you on that?
Uncompromising on the safeguards is the position that we should adopt, but don't stand in the way of the powers that are necessary for law enforcement and for the security services where they need them.
And you've squared, to use my word, well, at least you've got the agreement of the Labour leader on that approach.
This is the position of the Labour Party upon which we're agreed.
Oh. And we're joined now by the former Shadow Home Secretary David Davis. Welcome back to the Sunday Politics. If you got judicial review as part of this process now for new surveillance powers, would that about do it for you?
Almost, yeah. I mean, there's a sort of new consensus. It's not judicial review, it's judicial authorisation.
I beg your pardon.
Very important.
Another matter. Yeah. Authorisation of warrants by judge, not politician.
Yeah, that's 9/10 of the way there. I mean, the simple truth is we've got too much surveillance in all sorts of areas because actually there's not a proper constraint and not a proper check. And if we got that, I think I'd probably largely lose interest in the area because it's no longer a real threat to our liberties.
What about your attitude towards what I was speaking to with Keir Starmer, because it was briefed out from the Home Office, of a two-tier approach, an initial warrant to find out what sort of websites I'm looking at, what sort of stuff I'm doing on my iPad or whatever. That comes from the Home Office. Yeah. But to dig down, to get into the content of what I've been doing, that needs a judge.
Now, the best guidance on this is the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, David Anderson, who did a very strong report on this. And what he said essentially is it's got to be independent and it's got to be, well, ideally judicially overseen, but got to be independent. So it can't be the policeman in the office next door or a spook in the office next door, and it can't be the Home Secretary. It's got to be somebody independent. If you do that, then you don't need two-tier systems. You have a uniform approach to everything.
But aren't politicians more accountable than judges?
No. Look, every time I've asked a question of any minister on a security matter, even what law did you do this under, they say we never comment on security matters. There is no accountability. I mean, when the various, look at the distinction between us and America. After 9/11, there were clearly errors in the intelligence handling which might have stopped it if they hadn't happened. The head of the CIA went. After 7/7, there were also clearly problems. We knew about these terrorists, we just didn't follow up on them because we had too much else to do. Nobody paid a price for that. They shouldn't have done, in my view, but they didn't pay a price for it. And we take a very soft approach to this. Ministers are not really accountable for this. If they were answering questions in Parliament about it, responding, it would be different, but they're not.
But they may not be accountable enough But many people will think they're more accountable than judges, who we don't know, who have jobs for life. I mean, one minister quoted this week says judicial oversight of interception warrants is a bad... Well, he didn't mean oversight. He meant judicial authorization of interception warrants is a bad idea, because he said, who is held accountable if a bomb gets through because the judge refused to sign a warrant?
Well, as I just said, nobody, in truth. There's a much better way of doing it. And again, Anderson points this out, and Rusi to some extent, the two of the most important reports on this. And that is, you have a proper oversight procedure as well. It backs up the thing. So you've got judges that do it, a single panel, not 3 or 4 different
ones. They then look in retrospect at what
They look in retrospect at everything that's done, before or after any errors. You know, they find them and then fine-tune the system. The aim at the end of the day is to protect the public. That's the main aim. At the moment, the Home Secretary does about 10 of these warrants a day. You know, a working day. It's impossible for any one person to do this. But it's bad practice, it's bad managerially, it's bad legally, and it's bad in terms of counter-terrorism.
Now, people who take your view, they often quote our allies, Canada, Australia, the United States, the Five Eyes countries, New Zealand too. They have judicial authorization of warrants. But I mean, I was looking at the figures. US judges approved 99.66% of all warrants.
Yeah.
In the end, it makes no difference.
Well, if
warrants are given.
Well, warrants are given, but and actually the US judges have been pulled up on this, of course, and they've actually been tightened up. They've now got somebody in there to put the other case. They didn't have that before. But the simple truth is that if you've got a decent system, you don't take a bad warrant to them. You don't go to them with the expectation of being turned down. You make absolutely sure you've got the right person, the right basis. And so the percentage doesn't tell you much.
If you don't get judicial authorization, will you go challenge this bill in the courts as you did the last bill?
No, because the last one was because it went through the Commons in one day, which was just a ridiculous thing. And I thought, it's not been properly tested, so let's test it elsewhere. I broadly believe Parliament's a better test than the court if it's allowed to do the job. Actually, I don't think this bill will get through either Commons or Lords without judicial authorisation.
Right, so even if the government comes out without it this week, it's going to have to change again.
It won't. There's a new consensus on this right across the board, across the experts, across the spooks, across the parties, and across both houses of Parliament.
I've been getting away with it all